Hi, I'm Ron with Cruising This Old Boat, and today I'm going to show you how to install a Garmin GT20 transducer on your boat. Hi, I'm Ron.
And I'm Marie.
10 years ago, we bought a broken down trawler for $4,000.
And nothing worked, not even the kitchen sink.
After a lot of hard work and help from our friends and family, we moved aboard Elixir full time. And now we are cruising this old boat while the work and fun continues.
So subscribe and give us a like and come along with us, cruising this old boat.
The first thing you want to do is ascertain whether your propeller turns clockwise or counterclockwise as you're standing behind the boat looking at the propeller. On my boat, it turns clockwise, so I'm going to want to mount my transducer on the right side of the outboard. If yours turned counterclockwise, you'd want to mount the transducer on the left side of your outboard. Next, you want to check underneath your boat and look for a flat spot in the bottom of the boat. Any ridges or strakes or anything protruding down out of the dinghy is going to cause cavitation, which will disrupt the reading of your transducer. So look for a flat area. The next consideration is you want your transducer to be as close to center line of your boat as possible, but it needs to be at least 15 inches away from the propeller of your outboard. Regardless of whether your boat requires it or not, it's recommended that you use a spacer block between the transom of your boat and the transducer. I'll explain why later. You can use whatever material you want for the spacer block, but I've chosen to use starboard. It's water impervious, so it's not going to rot over time like wood. But you can use whatever you want. Just if you use wood, know that you're going to have to keep it painted to keep it protected. Where starboard, once you put it on, you can forget about it. Other considerations, of course, is starboard can't be glued to the hull. You're going to have to mechanically fasten it, which means I've got to drill through the hull, where with wood, you could glue it on. Whatever you use, make sure that you round off all the edges so that nobody gets splinters or cut. In the case of starboard, this stuff is like a knife along the edges if they're not rounded. Also, in the case of my boat, I've got the weld along the seam on that ridge, and so you can see down in this corner right here, along that whole edge, I have rounded it even more so that it will go over that weld, so the weld doesn't make the block stick out. Make sure you check inside the transom to ensure that there's nothing in the way of where you're going to be drilling your holes. Next, you want to drill your mounting holes through the spacer block. Now, I'm using flathead screws for mine so that the screw doesn't stick out and obstruct the mounting of the transducer. So I need to drill a countersink in the starboard to fit that screw head into. Then, using your spacer block as a template, go ahead and drill the first hole through the transom. Then go ahead and dry mount the spacer so that you can line up the second hole. Once you've ensured that everything dry fits okay, then go ahead and remove the block and get everything prepared for a permanent mount. Now, you're going to have to apply some sort of sealant regardless of what type of spacer you're using. Since I'm using starboard, again, you can't seal starboard. You can't glue starboard. You have to mechanically fasten it. But we do want to seal the two holes that our bolts are going through so that water doesn't come in through the bolts. I'm going to use 5200, but you can use whatever sealant or adhesive you choose to use. In my case, I'm using stainless steel screws and putting through an aluminum hull. We don't want to cause any rust problems because of the two dissimilar metals, so I'm going to use nylon washers on the inside to separate the nuts from the hull. then do a little cleanup, and at that point we're done for today. We need to let that adhesive or sealant, whatever you used, I use 5200, we need to let that sit for 24 hours so that it can cure. Now that our sealant has had time to properly cure, it's time to actually mount the transducer. The first thing you want to do is put the template on to make sure everything's going to fit okay. You want to make sure that where you're going to drill the holes for the mounting bracket, that's not going to interfere with the screws or the bolts that you already used to mount the spacer block. You want to make sure that the little arrow in the bottom corner, in my case the right hand corner, is more or less touching the edge of the bottom of your boat. And you want to make sure that the line along the top of the square of the template is parallel to the surface of the water. In my case, I can look on the stern and you can see this line, that water line. So I basically know where my water line sits, and I can use that as comparison to make sure that it's parallel. You want to try to get the bottom of the transducer kind of level with the bottom of your boat. Now if you have a flat bottom boat, that's easy to do. So the bottom of your transducer should line up more or less perfectly with the bottom of your flat bottom boat. In my case, I have a V-hole. So with a V-hole, you want it to be maybe 1/8 of an inch lower than the hole. And it's kind of a guessing game, to be honest with you. And this is why you want to use a spacer block instead of mounting directly to the hole. If you don't get it right the first time, you move it around and you can't get it at the right position and you need to drill new holes, you're doing it into a spacer block and not making new holes into your boat. One of the reasons you don't want it to extend too far down, several reasons actually, it'll cause drag on your boat if it's hanging too far in the water. It'll create turbulence, which will make its reading off, and it could strike objects and break it. So you don't want it any lower than you have to. So start with a more or less level with the bottom of your boat, and then we'll adjust as necessary. Once you've drilled your holes using the template as a guide, then go ahead and remove the template and mount your transducer. Once you have the transducer's mounting bracket mounted parallel to the water line and you have the transducer at the proper height, then what you want to do is tighten up the transducer on the bracket so that the transducer will be parallel to the water line. Next, route the transducer's cable through the transom cable mounting bracket. And at this point, before we do any further installation, we want to check and see if we have watertight integrity. Remember, we did drill 2 holes through the transom. So let's put her down in the water and see what happens. All right, she's in the water. I don't see any leaks, so that's a good thing. The next step is to plug it into your reader, whatever kind of reader you have, chart plotter in my case, whatever you're going to hook the transducer up to, and tidy up your cables. Once you have your transducer completely installed, you want to put your dinghy in the water and make sure that the transducer is under the level of the water. Next, you want to test your transducer and make sure it's working. So with your boat not moving, check whatever indicator you're using to show the depth, and make sure that it is properly showing the depth. In this case, mine is. So the next step is we're going to slowly increase the speed until we get to wide open throttle. All the while, you want to be watching the reading of your depth and make sure that it's registering what seems to be an accurate depth the whole time. If it's not, if at some point the depth drops out, pay attention to what speed you're doing when it dropped out, because you're going to need to get back to that speed again. So first, let's check and make sure that it's working. reading what appears to be a proper depth throughout the entire spectrum of my speed, which means it's working fine. So that's it. We are done with the installation and ready to go enjoy our boat. Now, if yours dropped out at some point, make note of the speed and then return to that speed, and then make moderate turns to the left and to the right, and see if the reading comes back. If it comes back while you're turning, then you need to drop the transducer another 1/8 of an inch and then try the whole test over again. If you don't get your depth back when you're making turns to the port and starboard, then you're going to have to move your transducer. It's not reading for whatever reason at that location, and this is why we use the spacer block, so that you can make more holes in it and not more holes in the back of your boat. So just move your transducer to the left or right, and then do the test all over again. Just keep repeating all that until you can go from 0 to wide open throttle and not lose your depth. Thanks for watching.